Hey, Bill. Well, they would be coming from the 82nd Airborne Division. 1,500 troops from that division were already scheduled to be deployed to Afghanistan sometime next month. But what this plan would do is deploy the entire brigade, almost 4,000 troops. And they would be sent into Afghanistan primarily to train and assist the Afghan troops that are, of course, already on the ground there. The other key component of this plan would be to hand over more of the decision-making to the Pentagon, which, of course, has been a key part of the Trump administration. It would give the Pentagon the authority to set troop numbers in Afghanistan. It would also give the Pentagon the authority to use airstrikes on Taliban militants. Bottom line, this would really just represent a renewed commitment by the U.S. in Afghanistan. Here's the head of U.S. Special Operations Command just last week on Capitol Hill. Listen.
I think the critical factor is the commitment to some enduring state that has not been described effectively in the past. And I think the new strategy is going to establish that definition.
But just to put all of these troop numbers in perspective, when Obama announced the surge back in 2009, that was 30,000 troops. This is closer to just 3,000, and it really just replaces the 1,400 that were just pulled out of Afghanistan in the closing days of the Obama administration.
Wow.
Bill?
So why send more troops now? What's happening on the ground there, Kristen, that would necessitate this?
Well, part of it are the recent gains on the battlefield by the Taliban. If you remember, just last month, Taliban militants killed about 140 Afghan soldiers in an assault on a military base in northern Afghanistan. But, the other reason is President Trump, he's going to be going to the NATO summit in Brussels later this month, where he's promised to pressure other NATO countries to contribute more troops as well. So he comes from a better negotiating standpoint if he's able to say that the U.S. is sending in more troops as well.
Good point there. Kristen, thank you so much. Kristen Fisher at the Pentagon today. Shannon.
All right, for more on this, Steve Hayes is editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard and Dave Fox News contributor. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Shannon.
Okay, so this would obviously represent a shift in many ways, certainly from what we had under the Obama administration. But critics of this potential move to add more troops in say, listen, even as the Obama administration got levels up to 100,000 troops, it didn't solve these problems in Afghanistan. They're very skeptical about sending more troops back.
Well, look, I don't think anybody should think that we can solve the problems of Afghanistan. Those problems are vast. It's unlikely that we'll be able to solve them this decade or the next decade or the decade following. However, what you saw from the Obama administration, which was an approach which embraced the Afghan Taliban and sought to separate them from al-Qaeda and other militants, that was never going to happen. You can read about it in detail in Hillary Clinton's book, where she talks about having approached the Taliban for secret negotiations, trying to separate them from al-Qaeda. Numerous experts on radical Islam, folks at the Pentagon, people in the intelligence community suggested to the administration that that was a fool's errand, that it wasn't likely to succeed. And indeed, we've now seen that it hasn't succeeded. That's why President Trump is having to do this. I should add, if you go back and look at the assessments that the Obama administration made of al-Qaeda's presence in Afghanistan throughout the second term, they typically said that there were only about 150 to 150 al-Qaeda militants in Afghanistan. Well, we know that that was wrong. We found a training camp that was vast, dozens of square miles big. So the Obama administration looked the other way on this. The Trump administration is left to clean it up.
Well, and 4 years ago, then citizen Trump had this to say in a tweet. He said, let's get out of Afghanistan. This is 2013. Our troops are being killed by the Afghanis. We train and we waste billions there. Nonsense. Rebuild the USA. We know that during the campaign, he seemed very hesitant about sending our troops to get involved in foreign issues. But of course, once you become president, you have different intel. Things change over 4 years. It's a much different decision to make when you're the commander-in-chief, essentially.
It is. And look, I mean, this isn't the first time that President Trump has contradicted himself. The things that he said on the campaign trail or the things that he said years earlier, he's looking at with new eyes as he's president of the United States. Look, he made two contradictory claims when he was running for president. One was, we are going to defeat ISIS and win the war, win the 9/11 wars, win the war against radical Islam. And two, we're not going to be involved as much anywhere overseas, particularly in those troubled regions. Well, you can't do both. You've got to make a decision as to whether he wants to really win these wars or try to win these wars, or whether we're going to pull back and leave Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and Yemen and elsewhere to these radical Islamists. And if that's what he chooses to do, we're not going to win the 9/11 wars.
Well, my understanding of what they're proposing, obviously this would have to go to the president for his final say, but it would give a lot more authority to the Defense Department, to the Pentagon, with regard to setting troop levels and also with regard to airstrikes on the Taliban. The president has seemed to express a lot of confidence publicly in the military and saying he wants to let them do their jobs. They seem very appreciative of that approach.
They do. No, you talk to them, and they're sort of eager to have the fight. I mean, this is our military folks and our intelligence folks want to win this fight. They've made that clear, year after year. And one of the things that I've heard from the folks that I've talked to is they expected President Trump to change the rules of engagement to allow them to win the fights that they have sooner. They're surprised that this hasn't happened earlier. I think it'll be interesting to see not only what he chooses to do in Afghanistan, but also what he chooses to do in Iraq and Syria. You talk to people who have sort of ground level understanding of what's happening in Syria, and they say if you provide close air support, in addition to what we're doing working with the vetted Syrian opposition, you could have a dramatic impact in just a couple months in wiping out ISIS, or making strides in wiping out ISIS. They're looking for the president to provide that leadership and to free them up to win the wars that he said that the United States would win. And
he has had very strong language on that, made that promise, and has taken some very decisive action on that front. Steve Hayes, always good to see you. Thank you.
Shannon.
While you folks were watching that, we were watching this. NSA Director Michael Rogers speaking out for the first time today about last year's unmasking of U.S. citizens caught up in foreign surveillance. So what is his point today? Catherine Herridge is live outside the hearing room. And Catherine, good morning to you. What will come of this today?
Well, so far this morning, Bill, the focus has been on the posture of the U.S. Cyber Command and something called the gray zone. This is the battle space between peace and conventional warfare. These are information operations and exactly what we saw last fall with Russia and the U.S. election. It's in the gray zone that bad actors go to play when they cannot compete economically or militarily with the U.S. on a level playing field. And the NSA director testified this morning that they have seen no let-up in the cyber activity either by China or by Russia. And this is consistent with recent testimony that the Russian operation against the U.S. election required only a minimum investment for a maximum impact.
Russia's influence activities in the run-up to the 2016 election constituted the high watermark of their long-running efforts since the 1960s to disrupt and influence our elections. They must be congratulating themselves for having exceeded their wildest expectations.
The former director of national intelligence also testified that it was about a $200 million investment by the Russians in this information operation, and it's been so highly successful that we're talking about it nearly a year later, Bill.
Wow. What is the director saying about the worst case scenario for cyber, Catherine?
Well, when we look at this issue of the gray zone, and this may be a term that's not familiar to people at home, but this is one that you really want to start paying attention to because it's in this gray zone that these weaker actors like Russia can effectively take on the United States. And the NSA director just testified that in the worst case scenario, he sees the manipulation of data. And Senator McCain said, could you see the effect on voter tallies or voter rolls? And he said, yes, that could be a possibility in the future. So the manipulation of data rather than what we've seen to date, which is the stealing, the sort of going inside of systems and stealing that data out for some kind of economic or military benefit.
Well, Catherine, thank you. Catherine Herridge watching that hearing there in D.C. It's a long way from the butterfly ballot.
It is.
And the technology and elections is going to keep on coming one after the other.
People may want to go back to those hanging chads and butterfly ballots
I don't.
at some point. Hemmer's on record as
Hemmer was 37 days in Tallahassee.
That's true.
First one in, last one out.
I mean, my hometown, but you probably felt like you had enough.
I was before this.
All right. Well, coming up, former acting Attorney General Sally Yates testifying before the Senate yesterday.
I believe that it is the responsibility of the Attorney General, if the President asks him or her to do something that he or she believes is unlawful or unconstitutional, to say no. And that's what I did.
Why she says she refused to defend President Trump's original immigration order.
Also, Senator Rand Paul is launching an investigation into Obama-era surveillance. He's hot about this. Why he thinks the administration might have been spying on him.
And new information in that brutal murder of 2 Boston doctors over the weekend. What police are saying about the suspects.
We have no evidence to believe that they were in any sort of prior relationship. Nor is there currently any evidence to explain why he would attack them so viciously in their own home.
Stories heating up. Fox News alert now. The AG in Texas already filing a lawsuit against several cities and counties accused of not cooperating with federal immigration agents. All this coming only days after the state's governor signed a new law that aims to crack down on sanctuary cities. That measure blocks sanctuary policies and lets local police officers ask about the immigration status of anyone they stop. Local officers who refuse to follow that law face the possibility of jail time and a major fine.
I looked at this. I made a determination that I believed that it was unlawful. I also thought that it was inconsistent with the principles of the Department of Justice. And I said no. And that's what I promised you I would do. And that's what I did.
Former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates explaining why she told the Justice Department not to defend President Trump's original immigration order. A Virginia appeals court now reviewing the revised version of the travel ban to decide if the measure goes too far. Joining me now, Thomas Dupree Jr., the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Shannon.
Okay, so what do you make of this? I mean, the ban had undergone some legal analysis. She decided, though, to tell government attorneys if it goes to court, don't defend it. Was she right?
You know, I think she certainly has the right and had the right to reach her own conclusion and to follow her own conscience. But where I think she went seriously awry is that if she disagreed fundamentally with what the administration and the president was doing, I think the proper course would simply have been for her to resign, to enable someone else to assume the role of acting attorney general and execute the president's policies. But instead what she did was she issued an extraordinary order effectively directing DOJ attorneys not to defend the order. So I think, although she has the right to follow her conscience and make her own judgments, I think she followed that course in the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, this is not unusual. We have seen government officials in the past say if they believe a law is unconstitutional, they're not going to defend it. But you're right, not everybody ends up resigning. This is a little bit more of what she said about her analysis in reaching that decision. This is from yesterday.
And in this particular instance, particularly where we were talking about a fundamental issue of religious freedom, not the interpretation of some arcane statute, but religious freedom, it was appropriate for us to look at the intent behind the president's actions.
And that is what a number of federal judges have done. They've gone back to statements he made on the campaign trail. They've gone back to statements made by other Trump associates to say, regardless of how this looks on the face, we think it was intended to discriminate against, primarily against Muslims who are trying to emigrate to this country. And now it's interesting, yesterday, the federal appeals court that heard this decision with all those judges seemed split into 2 camps, those who think it's okay to think about and consider what the president said on the campaign trail versus just looking at the order on its face. Is it constitutional or not?
Right, and this is tricky because certainly there's precedent that says you need to look at the underlying intent or purpose of these types of enactments. But I think what makes it tricky in this case is that you could have a situation where 2 presidents, President Trump and President Obama, issue the exact same executive order. And because things President Trump has said in the past while on the campaign trail, his version is unconstitutional, whereas President Obama's would be constitutional, which is a very strange situation in the law.
Yeah, and, you know, we've got another federal court that next week, somewhere on the other side of the country, out in Washington State, is going to hear arguments over this same travel ban. Whether we get similar decisions, a split decision, I mean, do you think this is on a fast track to the Supreme Court one way or another?
I think it very well could be, Shannon. Certainly if we see the lower courts coming out different ways, I think there's an excellent chance the Supreme Court takes it. And look, President Trump has said from day one that this may well be a long legal haul. He knows it, the administration knows it, the American public knows it. This issue is going to be percolating in the lower courts, but at the end of the day, I think the court everyone's eyes are focused on is the one here in Washington, the Supreme Court, which may well be the final arbiter of this issue.
Okay, so recently the president had a success. They're getting Justice Gorsuch seated. Yesterday he rolled out 10 new judges, judicial nominations to lower federal courts. Equally important because that's where all these cases come through. That's what we're talking about. The left immediately not happy about some of these nominees. They say they're not being consulted. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says they didn't come to us and talk about any of these. Is that standard practice? I mean, how do you think things will go for these nominees?
I'm not aware that President Obama consulted extensively with the Republicans before making his decision, so I don't put much stock in that line of attack. And look, the fact is, these are terrific nominees. When it comes to judicial nominations, this administration has hit home run after home run. All of these people who were nominated yesterday are serious, thoughtful individuals who are committed to the rule of law. And even if people disagree with them ideologically, I don't think anyone can say for a minute that these are not people who are superbly qualified to be federal judges.
Well, and some of them were from the list, 2 of them from the list of 21 potential Supreme Court nominations. We'll see when the president gets another bite at that apple. In the meantime, Tom Dupree, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Great. Thank you, Shannon.
So in a moment here, another state joining the battle to take power away from Washington. We'll tell you where and what they're planning to do in a moment. That's coming up and ahead.
And why Billy Joel fans are busy celebrating.
You might have done only the good die young. That's what I said. Only the good die young. Only the good.
Tonight, socialism exposed. Venezuela spirals into anarchy. So why is a socialist blaming America? The debate blows up on Tucker Carlson Tonight.
He says he knew very early on that music was the center of his life. Now 16-year-old Michael John Bennett remembers hearing Vivaldi concerto CDs at home as a toddler and having them captivate him. By age 3, had picked up the violin. At age 4, he started playing the piano. Now Michael is focusing much of his time on playing the organ and composing music.
I just love the organ sound, you know, all the different types of sounds that you can create on the organ, the variety of colors that you can really achieve, the vastness of the sound world is just really amazing to me.
He started playing organ at age 10. Months later, he became the youngest person to perform on the famed Wanamaker organ in Philadelphia. He doesn't have an organ in his home, so he comes here to the Church of the Ascension in Manhattan to practice. He also travels to Philadelphia to take lessons, as the art is much different since you are pressing keys, pulling stops, and using foot pedals.
The closest thing I can compare it to is like flying an airplane. It's that kind of level of complexity. And it's just much more than tickling the ivories, you know. It's a whole process of, you know, finding what exact sound you want to use and then utilizing that sound within your piece.
Michael has a condition called synesthesia, which enables him to see color when he hears music.
Because when I hear different tones, the brain sends signals of color to my brain. It's really cool. I think in color in music too, and that's part of it. So it's very interesting.
Michael has performed at Carnegie Hall, on NPR, and in France. He graduated high school 2 years early and is a Juilliard School pre-college student. But his biggest achievement is winning a 2015 $25,000 Davidson Fellow for a project called Connective Color, innovating as composer, organist, and pianist.
What I submitted was a portfolio of me performing and my compositions, and me performing my own compositions. And I'm focusing on the aspect of just this idea of connective color and how, you know, my color influences my music.
Michael says his next goal is to go to conservatory and double major in organ and composition. In New York, Julie Banderas, Fox News.
A Cal State Long Beach professor capturing alarming footage on a GoPro camera in the Pacific Ocean. Take a look. Those are great white sharks swimming just 50 feet away from the shoreline. Professor says the sharks were curious, then poking their heads beneath his towboat several times. The footage now being used to analyze shark migratory pattern changes. They need to migrate right on away from my boat.
I would agree with that.
What do you think?
Yeah, stay away from my beach.
Do you get in?
I go in, but
I go like here.
Yeah. Well, I
can
go
bite you down there.
a little deeper than that. But not much further.
Here. That's it.
'Tis the season. Texas becoming 11th state to call for a constitutional convention to limit federal government power. The 11 states would need to become 34 because that's the number needed to amend the Constitution. Doug McElway is on that live in D.C. Doug, good morning to you. How would this work?
Well, Bill, the legislatures in at least 34 states would have to pass a resolution calling for a convention of the states. Those resolutions, called applications, would be delivered to Congress, which would then set a time and a place for a state's convention. As proponents see it, the convention would realign the balance of our system of government as the founders intended, and they say the time is ripe for that.
We have $144 trillion in debt and unfunded liabilities. For every taxpayer, that's $1 million. But for the millennials, it's 1.7 million they're going to have to come up with over the next 50 years. And so we're going down the path that every other republic has done in terms of fiscal irresponsibility that will eventually cause our country to unwind.
The time is also at hand, proponents say, because Republicans control both chambers in 32 different states. They also hold 33 governor's offices. 34 are needed before a convention can take place. Supporters believe our government is out of whack in 4 distinct ways. First, the debt crisis, which is saddling future generations with unmanageable spending. The regulatory crisis, which imposes too great a burden on businesses and slows growth. Lack of state sovereignty caused by the federal government mandates and state grants, and the federal takeover of the decision-making process, in effect centralized power in Washington in a broad sense that has replaced the system of checks and balances required by the Constitution. Bill, as you said, the Texas legislature became the most recent to support a convention. Governor Greg Abbott has suggested that a convention of states agenda would include requiring Congress to balance its budget, allowing a 2/3 majority of the states to override a Supreme Court decision, restoring balance of power between the federal and state governments, and allowing a 2/3 majority of the states to override a federal law or regulation. 11 legislatures have voted for a convention of the states, so supporters still have a really long way to go before any of this would happen, Bill.
Got it. What do opponents say about it, Doug?
Well, the whole idea of restoring states' rights is a loaded idea to progressives who fear the meaning of states' rights as it was interpreted during the Civil War years and slavery era. They also fear a runaway convention in which the Constitution is upended. Proponents say there are numerous safeguards against that, foremost of which is that any amendment to the Constitution would have to be ratified by 38 states. That's a high bar that reflects the will of the American people.
Got it. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Doug McElway, on that story today in Washington. Shannon.
We've got new details about a gruesome scene in a luxury penthouse. 2 doctors found dead, tied up with their throats slit. What detectives are now telling us about the suspects.
Wow.
This is a Fox News alert. Prosecutors now saying the suspect in the murder of 2 engaged Boston doctors did not shoot at police, but a fake gun was found at the scene. The suspect was arraigned from his hospital bed yesterday on 2 counts of murder in the killings of Richard Field and Lena Bolanos, 2 anesthesiologists who were planning to marry. Molly Lyon is live from Boston to tell us more. All right, good morning, Molly. What is the latest you're hearing on the investigation?
Good morning, Shannon. Well, the man police believe viciously murdered these 2 successful doctors remains hospitalized at this hour as they continue to probe, try to figure out exactly how it is he may have gained entry to the 11th floor of this luxury building here in South Boston. The suspect, Bampamum Texiera of Chelsea, 30 years old, faced the judge from his hospital bed at Tufts New England Medical Center yesterday afternoon, recovering from gunshot wounds sustained when police responded to reports of a man with a gun encountering Texiera wearing dark clothing in a dark hallway inside the apartment. Police believe he either pointed or fired a weapon and hence discharged their own weapons, striking Texiera in the hand, abdomen, and leg. As officers provided first aid, Texiera allegedly told them that another person would open fire if they went back inside. Texiera was rushed to the hospital and a SWAT team was called to the scene. They secured the area and discovered the victims. Richard Field, 49, a doctor at the North Shore Pain Management Clinic, and Linda Bolanos, 38, a pediatric anesthesiologist at Massachusetts Eye and Ear. They had been bound and had suffered obvious trauma. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Field had texted a friend late Friday night seeking help. That friend called 911, alerting police to the armed intruder at the apartment. Prosecutors say 2 weapons were found at the scene, a knife and a replica firearm. That look-alike gun was inside a black backpack. Also discovered in the bag, jewelry belonging to Bolanos. Shannon?
Well, Molly, any word on if the victims knew their attacker? Was there any relationship?
Yeah, the DA Daniel Connolly, really pushed back on this. He said that at this point in time, looking into the investigation some 3 days later, that there is no link. Take a listen.
We have no evidence to believe that they were in any sort of prior relationship. Nor is there currently any evidence to explain why he would attack them so viciously in their own home.
Teixeira also had a record. He had been sentenced to a year in prison for 2 bank robberies, confessing to robbing the same bank twice. He's now, of course, facing those murder charges and being held without bail. Shannon?
All right, Molly Line for us in Boston. Thank you very much.
We've been hearing rumors, and anonymous sources have been telling us for a couple of months now that they believe that the Obama administration was spying on other presidential candidates other than Trump, and that it may be politically motivated.
Senator Rand Paul doesn't think it ended there. He wants to find out the White House spied on him. He also wants to know if other members of Congress were being followed by the intel community during the Obama administration. Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, Fox News contributor. Mo Lathy is the former communications director of the DNC. Now with executive director of the Georgetown Institute for Politics and Public Service. Mo, they give you long titles, don't they?
Tell me about it.
I need a cheat sheet over here. Nice to see you in New York. It's good to get you out of that hole down there in that office where you were working, okay?
Out of the swamp.
And Rich, it's nice to see that you're healthy. The swamp, okay. Reverse surveillance is something that Rand Paul's been on for a couple years now. He sent this tweet out a bit earlier. I formally requested from the White House and the intel community, info on whether I was surveilled by the administration or the intel community. Can he get his answer?
Well, he should. He deserves one. I think it's highly unlikely that there was a deliberate effort to surveil Rand Paul. Of all the Republican presidential candidates, he was the least likely, among the least likely to actually become president.
Probably the guy who talked about it the most. Sometimes it was a singular topic
he has been consistent on this issue over the years, and consistently has thought the executive branch would abuse this power. So it makes sense that he would be concerned about this.
Mo?
Yeah, I mean, I give Rand Paul credit for being consistent. This is his issue. It has been his issue for a long time. I don't think we've seen any evidence at all that there was any improper unmasking or surveillance. And then I take some issue with how he's characterizing it. The administration did not spy on any presidential candidates. What's coming out in the course of the investigation on Russia is that some Trump campaign officials were caught up in surveillance of foreign officials.
But when you take that information and you give it to a national newspaper, well, there is evidence then in that article that has since been revealed, that was printed in the Washington Post.
Well, again, what we are seeing now, and I think this is incredibly clever politics by Rand Paul and some other Republicans to try to turn the focus to the leaking or the unmasking, as we saw in yesterday's hearing with Sally Yates, to try to deflect from the underlying investigation into Russia and its collusion or potential collusion.
There was no evidence of collusion that came out of that hearing yesterday.
But we did see that there is
an asked point blank, is there a collusion? Haven't found it.
He said that he hasn't seen any direct evidence yet, but that there is an ongoing investigation.
Is it more than clever, Rich?
But just given how much leaking we have seen, if there is any smoking gun in the Russian matter, it would be out there already. And I think both sides are likely to come up empty, both on the Russian collusion story and both on a big surveillance scandal. It's just unlikely you're going to be able to prove that the unmasking was illegitimate, it was deliberately given to people to leak to certain reporters, and it's very unlikely that the Russians would have colluded with the Trump administration. They stole the information, they gave it to WikiLeaks. Why does the Trump campaign need to enter into that equation at all?
I think you guys both make really interesting points. Lindsey Graham from yesterday asked this question. Let's put a button on it right now.
How many people can request unmasking of an American citizen in our government? General Clapper, how many?
I don't have an exact number. It's, I think, fairly limited because it's normally fairly high-level officials.
I mean, at the end of that hearing, Lindsey Graham said the options are not many, and eventually we're going to find out. Let's see if that's the case. Rich, your larger point is that if there were collusion, we'd know it by now. And Mo, when you talk to your Democratic colleagues in Washington, do they feel like this is an issue they can ride for months, if not years? and use it against this administration.
I think that Democrats in Washington right now are very eager to let the investigations, both at the FBI and on the Hill, play out. And I will say this to Rand Paul and his supporters. If privacy is truly at the core of your concern here, then you should be encouraging and wanting this investigation to play out, because there is no greater breach of privacy than a foreign government hacking into U.S. citizens' private emails. They did it in an electoral context. They could do this in the private sector to wreak havoc in other ways. Yeah, so this is something we should continue to play out.
Get to the bottom of both and get all the facts out. But so far, what we know, President Trump it was poor judgment to hire Michael Flynn. It was poor judgment to hire Paul Manafort. Both were fired. And I believe that's probably the end of the story.
Have you ever both thought about whether or not we're giving the Russians too much credit?
For the masterminding the whole thing and coordinating with the Trump campaign and compromising everyone and being able to blackmail everyone?
No answer to that.
No, I don't.
The Russians
I
too much
don't,
credit?
and I give a lot. I believe in our 17 U.S. intelligence agencies that all agree this, and we've seen it in other Western democracies. And I thought Director Clapper made an interesting point yesterday, which is that this is the digital age culmination of efforts that the Russians have been undertaking for 50 years.
You know, Rich, final comment.
Well, the underlying weakness of Hillary Clinton was Hillary Clinton and her campaign. And that's why the election was so close. That's why she was vulnerable to late-breaking events like the Comey letter. And that's the one thing she really can't admit, and she should.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you.
Nice to see you out of the swamp.
Bring us back up more often.
We shall. Thank you, gentlemen.
This is Fox Extra. Hello, Canada, and thank you for watching Fox on Bell. If you have a question or a comment about one of our shows, feel free to email us at foxaroundtheworld@foxnews.com.
The trend in the toy industry right now, and I refer to it as the 3 C's. Collectible toys, which has always been popular. Kids like to buy and trade with their friends. Classic toys, which are the toys that mom and dad had as a child, toys they want to play with and reintroduce. And the toy industry is great at this because when they see another generation being formed, they want to bring back those memories. And the 3rd C is crafting.
A big trend right now is teenage girls making and then buying and selling collectibles made from slime and other materials. The toy industry, which is coming off an excellent year of 5% sales growth, is being driven by innovation and ingenuity. The good news for consumers is that technologies that were just emerging a few years ago have become more affordable.
Not only you get to control a paper airplane, but you actually get to experience flight as if you're flying on a paper airplane. You can see here we have a live streaming video that comes from the airplane, and our kit includes also a VR viewer. You just slide it into the Google Cardboard, and just by tilting your head up, down, right, and left, you can actually control the airplane and see the world from the perspective of the airplane itself.
Toy makers are successfully using technology to enhance traditional toys rather than replace them. This is a Barbie hologram.
Hello, Barbie. There she is.
Hi there. It's so good to see you. So, what are we going to do first?
The trend in educational toys that teach kids important concepts like science, technology, engineering, arts, and math isn't going away. But it has transformed into STEAM, adding an R for robotics.
So many boys and girls that have learned robotics in schools, have seen it in toys already, are really asking for more. So, for example, Lego has a set called Boost, where you're actually using robotics and STEM and learning and coding all at the same time. And so kids are creating the play value of the toys that they make.
Licensing has been a huge boon to the toy business for the past several years, capturing about 30% of total U.S. toy sales. And this year will be no exception, thanks to a wave of family-friendly movies hitting theaters.
In addition to mashups, you're just seeing great storytelling coming alive on the retail shelf and on the toy shelf. We've got everything from Despicable Me 3 coming out. We've got more Star Wars, of course. We've got Transformers.
Along with their high-tech counterparts, low or no-tech toys are still expected to be popular in 2017. In New York, Laura Ingle, Fox News.
We have to wait for the line, guys. Piano man Billy Joel celebrating a birthday today. 5-time Grammy winner, turned 68 years old today. Rolling Stone named him one of the 100 greatest songwriters of all time, 33 top 40 hits over a career that's lasted 50 years. He's taken up residency at New York's Madison Square Garden, where he performs every month for about 2 years now. Every show has been sold out. He says he'll stop performing once demand runs out. So today, on this day, we say, happy birthday, Billy Joel. Well done. Vienna waits for you as well.
And he shares his birthday with Janice Dean and Dana Perino.
Oh, who knew?
It's a trifecta.
Gosh.
We're all going to celebrate together. Call Billy after the show. Well, some progressive groups planning dramatic demonstrations to protest the Republican efforts to replace Obamacare. One super PAC now planning to hold mock funerals in some GOP-led districts, complete with gravestones, caskets, and eulogies. Another activist is asking Democrats to have their ashes shipped to Republican leaders if they can show a connection to dying without health care. Joining me now, David Bossie, the former deputy campaign manager for President Trump's campaign, a Fox News contributor and president of Citizens United. David, good to see you today.
Thanks for having me.
That's quite a roundup there. And these are getting very graphic, some of these plans. They're going to ship caskets to Republican lawmakers' districts. Jason Haber, who has worked in New York Democratic politics, said this: we must be far more visceral. He wants the tombstones, coffins, eulogies. He says for the constituents that will be killed as a result of losing access to health care. They're good at the PR battle. What do you make of this?
I really don't think this is being good at a PR battle. I think that they need to come up with some solid ideas. Look, the American people want solutions and not scare tactics, and that's what the left only does. President Trump won based on ideas. And let me just challenge these folks for a second. During September and October, during the campaign, President Trump, then candidate Trump, was challenged if he would accept the results of the election. We've all forgotten that. He got asked every day, will you accept the results? And of course, now we see this permanent campaign by the paid professional left, these paid organizers who are out there permanently campaigning against President Trump and everything that he tries to accomplish, which is, in this case, is saving the American people from the failed Obamacare policies.
But you know how the public argument goes on this. I mean, there were a number of things that were said by the left and by Democrats last week that were pretty outrageous with respect to that House bill. They were even fact-checked by groups that are not right-leaning groups. They were debunked. But I get tweets and I talk to people on the street who don't know that. They don't get that. They are convinced that some of the things that have been said on the Senate floor in tweets by Democrats, lawmakers, that they're actually factual. Those things have stuck with people, even though, like I said, outside groups who are not leaning to the right have disproven them.
Well, let's just talk about this for a moment in this sense, that the Senate is going to take the next month or two to get health care, Obamacare repeal and replace through the Senate and then back to the House. Once that is done and the bill is enacted and the president signs it, and we're going to be able to save the American people from failures across the country. We saw in Iowa last week, all but 3 counties have choices in health care. Maryland, the premiums got announced this week. They're going up between 50 and 100%. These are based on Obamacare numbers, not Donald Trump's repeal and replace plan. So Obamacare has been failing and failing at a rapid pace. So what this bill is going to do is save our healthcare system. And I think that over the next couple of years, this thing will take a couple of years. Obamacare, I believe, took 6 years to be fully implemented. This is going to take one at least full complete year next year. And I think people's premiums are going to go down. I think patient access to care is going to go up. And I think people with pre-existing conditions, like my family, are going to be well taken care of.
So what do you make of the Obamacare architect, Jonathan Gruber, who on Fox News Sunday said that he bears some of the blame for the failures of Obamacare on President Trump because he's introduced instability and uncertainty into the system by talking about taking away things and overhauling things. He says the failure of Obamacare is now in part because of President Trump.
These folks are flailing around. They see the effect that President Trump is having on their broken policies. Their ticket to socialized medicine, which is really what Obamacare was really the first step in single payer. And that's what Gruber and his team wanted. And we all know that from the tapes that were uncovered years ago. So, look, they are upset because President Trump is talking the talk. He is delivering on the promises that he made to the American people in repealing and replacing Obamacare, and they can't stomach it. So they're going to go to every length that they can to try to destroy his presidency and try to undermine him with the American people. It's simply not going to work.
Well, to the left and the right and the American people, we hope facts are what we will all base our decisions upon. David Bossie, good to see you. Thanks you.